breaking barriers and bridging the gaps between patients and doctors. Welcome to Brainstorming with the Docs and your co-hosts, Dr. Glenn Harrison and Dr. Kolby Condos.
All right, everyone, welcome back to this week's episode of Brainstorming with the Docs. I'm Dr. Kolby Condos, my co-host, Dr. Glenn Harrison. How's it going, buddy?
Doing great. I'm doing great. How was your evening?
Good, man. It's a lot better this week. As you know, I had a bunch of
natural disasters in your house and yard.
Bunch of crap happen. So today we're talking about something that's impacted all of us, I think, especially throughout this the last year and a half, we'll say. And today we are talking about how quarantining or social isolation has impacted our health. If this is your first time listening or watching, please turn on notifications, hit the like and subscribe, because we're going to continue to roll out new information each and every week, and you never know when what we roll out might be applicable to you. So without further ado, let's talk about how isolation and social distancing and all that has impacted our health.
Wow. Well, this is a big topic. I know we could rant forever, and we could have a million different professionals on here to try to break this down and dissect it so people can understand their symptoms that maybe they had when they're going through it, or still have, probably still have, because I think there's some long-term effects to some of this. And I think as far as we're going to go at this today is we always say break it down, which I like, but maybe it's getting old, but dissect it as much as we can. So, the circumstances associated with all of this, it created the way we look at ourselves. It changed the way changed our activities. Ultimately it became socially lazy. We became socially lazy. It had profound impacts. What caused it? Well, our quarantine, our social distancing, our what we perceive as a social normal or not. So it altered our sense of what we believe is normal. See somebody in a grocery store. Well, maybe you're not in a grocery store anymore, so you can't do that. But then when you get into a grocery store, you expect to gesture back by smiling to someone. Now you can't. So then you can't read them. You can't understand them. You get used to not having any physical, or I should say, visual connection with anybody. And
it really is pretty well. And you take into account too that people are, we're having to mask and all that stuff. So we're no longer able to read like the nonverbal gestures. You know what I mean? You're no longer able to read the nonverbal cues. And I think on top of that it's really, not only has it affected us that way, but it's also affected the way that like our schedules have worked. You're not getting up for work. You don't have to go into work anymore. So you're not getting up at 6 a.m. You're not doing your exercise. You're not getting dressed and doing your shower and eating your breakfast or whatever, so it's affected how your morning schedule. It's affected our hygiene because, you don't have to look, bright eyed and bushy tailed when you don't have to go into the office anymore. And then it also has affected, not only our dress, our hygiene, and our schedule, but then also how we interact with our peers. Because we look at it as like, if I have to meet you face to face, I'm going to interact with you differently than if I have to communicate with you over like email or instant messenger or something like that.
That's exactly right. So in my clinic, we were doing a lot of video consults prior to COVID restrictions. And then we went 100%. And now after, we do have some patients come in the office, and it's completely different. I question the way I'm interacting with my eye contact to my clients, completely different than before. So I think we lose a skill set. We get lazy, we pull out of it. And I think social interaction requires a significant amount of neural input, and you could probably elaborate on this. And if you don't do it, as you always say, the brain is like a muscle. If you don't use it, you lose it. And I think you can lose your social interaction skills. I would agree with that. Your body communication, your visual communication. And I caught this. Communication. Yeah, I caught this in my consult just the other day. I'm like, whoa. My goodness, what happened to me? I have to go back to Zoom life forever.
Right. Well, you look at it, even when we're doing stuff like this, right? You're always torn. Do I look at Glenn's face? Do I look at the
Uh-huh.
camera? Do I look at Glenn's face? Do I look at the camera?
That's right.
If I'm looking at the camera, is that the same thing as making eye contact with that patient?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really interesting dynamic for sure.
That's right. So that those are some of the outcomes, but how did these play into our health? And I know we talked about this before when we were kind of putting this together, but you talked about less emphasis on appearance. So the joke where people don't get out of their pajamas and they're Zoom meeting all day, or maybe it's not even video, maybe it's just audio, who knows, or phone calls. I think the vast majority of the country, or maybe the world, have noticed a significant increase in weight gain due to COVID. I know I
just read an article that obesity actually it wasn't obesity, it was type 2 diabetes amongst children has went up I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think it went up around 17% during the pandemic. So literally we're not being as active. We're not taking pride in our appearance. We're not exercising. And this is manifested itself as serious disease, and it's happening in younger kids, and it's happening at an increased clip. So,
wow. Yeah. These things shouldn't even be in the conversation with children. These two things shouldn't be put together. So those are some physical, and then the mental and emotional. And there's probably gonna be a lot of data coming on this for the next decade, but a lack of mental stimulation for that social interaction, intellectual stimulation, conflict resolution. I think you came up with this when we were talking about this, but because we're not interacting with abstract minds. We're not interacting with diverse opinions. So we lose our tolerance of it. There's the keyboard warriors out there and exchanging views where there's more of a rant. So there's a reduced diplomacy, being diplomatic. And I think that diplomacy takes another higher level of emotional intelligence and skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a lot easier to just mute and shut off your camera than it is to have to deal with it face to face and come up with a resolution and, resolve your differences and come up with a strategy that you both can move on with. Whereas now it's just all right, well, I'm just going to shut you off and mute you. I don't have to deal with it because I'm not there physically. I don't have to deal with you.
Yeah. I'm so physically removed from everything. It's easier to emotionally remove myself from it. And then we get stuck into this rut. And, kind of what inspired all this. And I told you, there's a colleague of mine. I was at a business meeting and we were always separated by Zoom. We were having our Zoom meetings every week for a year. And we met up and he said something, and I know he'll be listening to this. And he told me, I was feeling very socially lazy. I was like, wow, that's a great topic.
Yeah,
because it's true. And it just takes us down the rabbit hole of all sorts of other health conditions. So we get stuck. So why is social interaction so important? And I know this is huge, but what are some things that?
Well, I mean, I think that humans are social by nature. You look at, there's obviously the different, whether you're an introvert or extrovert, but I think we all, to some capacity, crave interpersonal communication and interpersonal relationships. So when you look at it, we gain a lot of, that feeling that we get when we have those relationships, when we nurture those relationships, and when we experience that, we get a release of certain neurotransmitters, and it's addictive, right? Well, then all of a sudden, and this has even happened to me. I mean, I was in my wife the other day was like, I want to go to the zoo. And I was like, I don't want to go to the zoo. And she's like, well, why don't you want to go to the zoo? I was like, well, there'll probably be a lot of people there. And she's like, well, it's outside. We'll be, it's not a big deal. And I was like, well, geez, am I being reasonable about this? Because I'm nervous about this. So it really shows you that, when you don't use these skills, they can definitely atrophy. And it can lead to almost like a certain amount of social anxiety where we haven't been in a situation for so long that then all of a sudden we're put back in that situation. We don't feel comfortable, whether we've been conditioned or whatever to experience that. But I think that having those interpersonal communications, those interpersonal relationships is really important, not only for our mental health, but also for, our, the health of others around us.
That's right. Because they're going to feed off our energy. And if we're not giving a welcoming, confident energy, it's going to affect their feeling of being, confident being around you. And I think, naturally some humans are better and social. They can be isolated and jump back into the world much easier than others. Adaptability, I think, is good, and what our original tendencies are. But I think we can adapt to becoming antisocial and adapt to becoming social. And I think a lot of people have naturally adapted to some extent. They're still missing out on a lot, and they feel it, but they started to adapt to becoming antisocial, and that's their new comfort area. But it's not that comfortable because it creates all these other issues. So it also affects our relationships, right? Limited number of relationships and interactions, because if we're not physically present, we're not truly present or interacting with them.
Right. I cannot imagine trying to maintain, like, I live with my wife, I live with my kids, but I cannot imagine trying to have a relationship with someone that I couldn't see.
Mm-hmm.
Could you imagine that? Or, you've been in a long-term relationship with this person, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, you're supposed to quarantine, keep your bubble really tight knit. I'd imagine that would be really stressful, and maybe you lose the vibrancy of that relationship, but also like the fulfillment that you get out of it.
So
I'd imagine that
you're saying if you're around someone too much,
well, or not being able to, but then you got the other side of the coin too, right? Where they say variety is the spice of life. Well, all of a sudden it's like you're stuck in the same room with the same person for 3 weeks, and you're like, I really like you, but you need to get out of my face or get out of my bubble.
I think it's true. And I think we need that diverse exposure to the world to be able to appreciate the authenticity, the originality of that individual that we care for. Otherwise, we don't see anything else. We can't appreciate it, like you're saying. So there's probably going to be a lot of data out of how this has affected, relationships, family relationships.
Yeah.
So that is another effect. So I guess we talked about a lot of trauma from this, and everybody's experienced, and we didn't even get into the details of emotional health and mental health disorders. And right now, any of my colleagues that work on mental and emotional health, they are booked. They're booked for like ever. There's not enough of these people right now because it's caused so many problems. And we know health is always steered from the mind. If the mind isn't in the right place, the human's not going to do what they need to do. They're not going to know what they need to do. They're not going to see value in what they need to do. They're not going to have the motivation to do anything they need to do. And by a lack of those activities or doing the bad activities, then their physical health starts to decline, further reinforcing their mental health issue or disorder, amplifying it. And then the loop just continues, and it all starts at the mind. So it's pretty troublesome to see what has came from all of this. But
well, I think that, and actually I think this is a good time to bring up this point that we talked about. This was from a study that you pulled, actually. And basically, to summarize everything, a lack of social connection heightens health risks as much as smoking 15 cigarettes a day or having an alcohol use disorder. And they found that loneliness and social isolation are twice as harmful to physical and mental health as obesity. So let that sink in for a second.
Madness. So yeah.
So literally, as long as you're able to go outside, you can smoke 14 cigarettes.
Break even.
And you're still good.
Yeah, you're at neutral. But it's true. We all know the effects of smoking and its detrimental effects. But just add a smoking problem, an alcohol problem on top of your health. That's what's happening.
You're probably not doing them by themselves.
Yeah, that's what's happening. With this social isolation and the lack of interaction in the world. And, maybe you quit smoking and you didn't die from cancer and get a, cirrhosis of the liver, and you quit, drinking heavily. The effects of that, hopefully your body can adapt and start healing. That emotional health can create a scar and damage all sorts of things around you. So even you start social interaction, you got to learn to be social again. You got to be confident in yourself. You got to do all of these other things to reestablish relationships. And that's going to have a very, very long drawn out effect. I know emotional health professionals, they say that this is going to be a long-term thing. It's not going to, like, we snap our fingers, we're back in the swing of things. So
right.
It's frightening. So what can we do? Well,
I think that first off, you need to recognize that there are consequences and there are certain things that are going to happen as a result of social isolation. And if you're feeling not quite like yourself and you're feeling anxiety and you're not taking pride in your appearance, you're not exercising, you're not getting ready for work, like you need to realize that this can be at least a consequence of being isolated or having to social distance or whatever you want to call it. So I think at least recognizing that there are side effects of this.
So,
and that
so being
you're not
aware,
alone.
being more self-aware of why you feel the way you do. You didn't want to go to the zoo.
Yeah.
That it
and I knew what it was from,
Yeah, but that's maybe more self-aware. Not necessarily everybody is self-aware in this. And they're like, I just don't want to go.
I'm just not going to go to the zoo.
It's just not going to go because I don't want to look at a zebra.
Right.
It's like, oh no, I'm kind of crazy. I got to get past this craziness.
I don't want to go because there might be other people there.
Yeah. So being self-aware of these potential problems, and some people are going to be far on the end of the spectrum of antisocial. I don't want to go to the zoo and see zebras. And the other people are going to be like, I kind of feel uncomfortable. And knowing this is happening, and just like anything, I've never gone to the gym. I haven't gone to the gym for a long time. We missed a week of our podcast, right? Of recording. What happened? I told you I was dragging my butt. I wasn't that motivated because we're recording in the evening like we are right now. I'm like, well, but if we didn't miss last week, we'd be a little bit more versed. I wouldn't have became complacent. So I think forcing ourselves just to jump in as fast as we can, just like going to the gym or doing anything that we fell out of it, will adapt much faster and we'll get through this. So,
well, it's all about like plasticity, right? Yeah. So like the more you use something, the more plastic it becomes, right? It's like a skill, and that's what it is. Like socialization is a skill, like being, well-versed in social situations, being able to interact with people. It's a skill. You aren't innately born with it. You develop it. And the more you use it, the better it's going to get. So the more that you're doing things, the more you're in those situations, the more you're using that skill, the more refined, the sharper, the clearer, the cleaner it's going to get.
And it'll be less and less difficult. So
it starts less effort.
Difficult. Yeah, less and less difficult, less effort, comes more naturally, and then we make it our own. And then, with all of this, one thing I know we talked about is the social withdrawal from groups or the zoo, or I'm going to say the zoo again. If you're like, oh, the zoo is scary, so you don't go to the zoo. And then, a week later, your wife says, we really like to go to the zoo. I don't know. We make it bigger and bigger than it needs to be. We amplify this as a monster in our minds. And that inaction always creates more and more insecurities. Action will always create confidence. And it doesn't take much. We just put our toes over the edge to a little bit of fear, and we actually gain confidence. We can do a lot more. So action. So push yourself, and it'll get better and better. So your world and your circle doesn't constantly contract.
Right.
So, even maintaining relationships when it feels uncomfortable, or pursuing them when it feels uncomfortable, because you'll get over that hump. And I'll see people, they'll sleep better. I'll see people, they're not falling into old eating habits. Subconsciously, they're thinking about their appearance, and they're thinking about taking care of themselves and fitting into the clothes that aren't just their pajamas that they've been wearing for the last year. So I think there's a lot to take away from this. And I think people just need to have that serious conversation that it can be affecting them, even if they don't feel like it, and putting it out into the open so they can start acting differently. Because being socially lazy is a real thing that has long-term consequences, and literally plays on our brain, makes it weaker.
You got it. So if this is the first time you guys liked or listened to the podcast, please hit like and subscribe, turn on notifications. And again, stay tuned, because we're going to continue to roll out new content each and every week. And we hope that we roll out something that's applicable to you. If you'd like to get a hold of us, we actually have an email associated with the podcast. It's info@brainstormingwiththedocs.com. You can get on our websites. Mine is www.northlakeschiropractic.com. Dr. Glenn's is www.drgharrison.com. And again, if you have questions, comments, you have an idea for a topic you'd like us to break down, please let us know, because we'd like to do it for you.
For sure. That sounds good, Dr. Kolby. And I'm glad throughout this whole time, I've never had to see you in video wearing pajamas. I think you've done pretty good.
That's because you don't see the bottom half.
All right. Well, we'll talk next day.
All right, buddy. Bye.
Bye-bye.